This is an interview with Steve Zebrock, Zebrock, whose professional name was Alan Brock. He is being interviewed by Mary Allison on February 7th, 1982. The kind of thing, this was only recent. This was 1977. That was the Hastings Enterprise. I think they may have forgotten it.
I mean, they did.
So I just want to save you all the work, because there isn't too much new to write about, and that's pretty well covered. I think someone has forgotten.
Well, maybe so. Was Lucille
Lucille Zecker.
was she the editor then?
No, Lucille, wait a minute, I think she was. But I'm not certain. It may have been Carol. I'm not certain, 1977, because this was the climax of the automobile accident thing.
Oh, yeah.
In which I had made a big stink, and I had gotten a lot of our leading people, and mostly the people who live around my area, and even people who drive through Villard, and Mrs. McAllister, whose husband runs the old folks place, they have to drive through. And Alan Schneider, the Broadway director who directed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Alan lived up here at Flower Avenue near Dobbs Ferry, but he was Hastings. And he said it was a bitch to go through there without the lights. So he wrote letters, and Charlotte Zollertel, and then I got a lot of the other people in around, and there was a constant barrage of letters. Directly I came out of the hospital, I was in such a fury. And you know, the other day, Thursday, I was coming from the A&P, and I had the car, and it was light, 10 after 4. And some son of a bitch, if you'll excuse me, woman, is driving from Lower Villard. Now, I have become petrified every time I cross that road, because those damn lights, I'm going to tell you something, you can stay here, I'll wait now until it's, all right, it turns. You start to walk, and you're here, you still have to go there, the light changes. And you still have to go those 3 steps, there's some bastard, he's going to come like this, and I mean as though he was in the Indianapolis Raceway, and you still have 2 steps to go. And I told them all about that when they had somebody from Albany here, when they opened up this so-called put the lights on, and all when the mayor was there, the chief of police was there, and Senator Winnicott. And they said, this is the business of, I said, it is not long enough time. There are plenty of people who cannot make it in the time allotted. And they said, well, there's more. I said, you could fry an egg in the time the green lights are on. They said, well, that's longer, deliberately, purposely, because there's more traffic going north and south than there is this
east
way.
and west.
All right. But there still isn't enough time. So I called up Gloria Pennington last night, and I told her, I pressed this floor just as I did with you, because I said, the awful thing that happens is suddenly inside of yourself you become petrified, and here I have the cart with me, the A&P cart, plus which I don't know which way to go. I don't know, and so I suddenly stand still, and I don't know if I should even do that. But what gets me is that that woman did not slow down at all. She did not slow down as she drove up. I'm aware of the fact that when you're coming up that steep hill, you have to accelerate your speed, etc. But you also know that when you get to the top of that hill, that you've got to slow up. And I have yet to have the right of way for pedestrian right of way. I never have.
That's terrible.
So Gloria said she is going to speak to the new village manager. She said, do you know him? I said, no, I don't know him. I knew the other one, Mulcair, whatever his name was. So I scream and yell and curse because it's unnecessary for another human being to have to go through the hell that I went through.
Yeah.
And another woman was George Murray, the trustee. His mother was hit on an August morning, beautiful sunlight morning, about 11 o'clock in the morning. Same reason, when they're going up the manor and you're walking, they still want to get past you this way or that way. And so she was hit in the middle of the road and both of her kneecaps were fractured. And she was a woman, 74.
No, excuse. Well, let's get back
Well,
to you.
I don't know if you want to...
I don't think I'll take the time to read it.
Well, I don't know if it covers...
Well, I'll do it in a different way.
Oh.
So,
Well, let me quickly show you. Now, this appeared in Reader's Digest in 1967. You don't have to read it. But it was the first story that I wrote that was accepted by a worthy or a professional or a financial something, Reader's Digest. And this was an old actor whom I had known, who, without anyone knowing this, who died without fame, without recognition, but he left his life savings of over $200,000 so that actors, struggling actors, could have shoes to walk around. And he said, you cannot hold your head up when your heels are run down. And so nobody, and this was 1966, and he died in 45 or something, in 20 years, no one had written a thing about him, except one or two or three lines here and there. Finally, I decided, I became so enraged about that too, so furious that some whore shoots somebody and somebody steals, somebody kills their mother, they get front page. And here's a man devoted his whole life to love, to a worthy cause, to help his fellow man, and he gets this much. So I wrote the article.
I'd like to read it.
Well, it's a worthwhile thing, and they liked it. A man, Walter Wager, who was editor of Playbill, the New York program, he bought it, and for Christmas of 1966, he printed it, and it was called Broadway's Secret Santa, which is rather neither here nor there, wrong title, but anyway, that was $100. Then he said, and I would like to show this to my friend John Allen at Reader's Digest, and I said, well, that's fine, because I thought it would fit the most unforgettable character.
Yeah.
And so he did show it to him, and they didn't, for some reason or other, think it was for that, but they did buy it to run as a special feature. So they paid me $750.
Very nice.
And that sort of threw me off my feet, because I had not sold anything up to that point, nor did I think that I had any particular writing talent. I had written a lot of columns, but I never considered that was called writing talent, to write a theatrical column or a gossip column. I think that's a lot of hooey. Anyone should be able to do it. But then I felt, now perhaps I can set down some of these incredible, amazing, beautiful, tragic stories that I had been part of in my 35, 40 years in the theater as an actor, as an actor's agent. I'm wondering about this.
Here.
Oh, I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you. So anyway, that's what that is. Now, that Billy Burke thing that you read, that appeared in here, but not entirely. I have to put my glasses on. This came out about 2 or 3 years ago. A friend of mine, Randolph Carter, a playwright, was commissioned to write this, and the world of closing. So, but what he did was, rather than stress the personal side of Vic Bell's life, he included it, but he put the emphasis on his artistic and his professional accomplishments, innovations, and achievements. That was where he put the emphasis, rather than on his who his mistresses were or whatever the hell. So part is here. It's only a couple paragraphs. That's that thing that Lucille has now.
Yeah. Well,
You don't have to read
actually, it's in the Historical Society, in the Billy Burke file.
This is only
Oh, yes,
about-
I remember this story.
This is 2 or 3 paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this. Uh-huh.
Now, this will all just...
That's nice. Well,
You don't have to read that either. Now, this is just 2 paragraphs.
May I borrow these to read them over later?
Yeah. Except I'll burn your house down if you lose them.
Oh, I won't. I'm very careful of other people's things.
Now, this is annoying. I purposely marked there's only about 3 paragraphs. This was an actor who was a star in Europe, Hungarian. And as an agent in the theater, I always favored, when I say favored, if they had no talent, and if they were slobs or whores like the Gabors, I didn't like to work with them. But if they were Hungarian and they were fine people and talented because of my father and mother being Hungarian, I always sort of opened the door a little bit wider for them. And this man was a star in Europe and brought over by Cecil B. DeMille in 1925, and he worked in every single picture DeMille made. In the 20s or the 30s, he was a leading man and played opposite most of the important actresses, Dee Daniels, Fay Ray, Irene Rich, Paula Negri. And that was in the silent era, but he had a definite Hungarian accent. However, later they utilized him in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and they had him playing a Spaniard in that. Anyway, in this, I didn't know after he died, he'd been up here and visited my mother, and he treated my mother as though she was royalty, which I liked very much, because my mother was a poor Hungarian girl who never had much of anything. And when this book came out, it was a curious thing. I thought, I'll wonder if he mentioned me. I bet he didn't, because most of the people that I have done things for in the theater did not ever think to mention me. And I was reading the book, and when I was about 1 paragraph away, my eye traveled 1 paragraph ahead, and I saw the name of Alan Brock. I said, my God, don't tell me. And I practically fell through the floor when he said about 2 or 3 very nice things about me. In essence, it was to the effect that I was he had found only one agent in the entire his career, who was honest, who, as he put it, was a selfless man. Selfless means without being selfish,
That's
something
right.
to that effect. And it's sort of a contradictory word. And, oh, damn it all, and I can't show
Maybe
it.
there's an index.
No, there isn't. That's what makes it annoying. I put this marker in here, but here it is, and damn it. Victor was fortunate during this period to have a truly unique individual on his side. He was an agent who really worked. For those unfamiliar with the entertainment field, an agent who really does an agent their work is as difficult to find as a saber-toothed tiger. Most agents are busy complaining that their clients aren't big enough to make producers come crawling with deals, or are out trying to steal other agents' clients. It's a unique profession, but then so is the world's oldest profession. The agent's name was Alan Brock, a selfless theatrical man. His efforts kept Barclay working in a variety of parts, character parts both on television and the stage. One play called for him to be the tyrannical old-fashioned father of a family of Mexicans separated in the early so-and-so, that's all.
Okay,
But
what page is that?
it's 177.
All right.
So I brought that only to show you.
Yeah.
One other thing that I'm doing, since 1967, I have been writing for this thing. It's not sold in newsstands. This deals largely with silent films and the early talkies, and it's only by subscription. And I have been writing for it, I've written probably 30 or 40, and this is the most recent one that I wrote. And the curious reason that this is an actress you was long before your time, in the 20s when I was 10 or 11. Gladys Walton. You see, she's still very attractive. She's not quite that beautiful today. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. But she was when I was seeing her. Mm-hmm. And she was sort of the gamine, the hoyden, the girl with spirit, with spunk, who refused,
the tomboy?
Yeah, who refused to comply with being the Pollyanna. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this because I had that terrific crush on her. And I hadn't written for this publication now for 3 or 4 years. And I stopped writing for them because they weren't paying. And I thought, nuts to them, I'm not going to write for them anymore. But inside of me was this urge to pay a homage. Do you say homage or homage?
I say homage.
I do too. I hate it without the H.
I guess the
Homage.
English say homage.
But that sounds cockney. Well, anyway, I wanted to pay tribute, even if it was in my own mind, to this love or crush or inspiration.
Mhm.
Because it was really more of an inspiration than it was. Because she was so spirited, so attractive, so beautiful, and I was 10 or 11, and I used to go to the movies here to see her silent pictures, and she lifted me. She pulled me forward.
What was her name?
Gladys Walton. She's still living. She telephoned me a week ago after she read this. She's now 78 years of age. And I wrote this thing because I started it with saying something, a thing of beauty is a joy forever, the Keats thing, and the memory of something that once inspired you stays with you forever. That was the theme of it. And at the end I said, so many stars of the silent films and early theater have never been able to understand how and why we, the people, the public, have this enduring and endearing memory and love for them. And I said, it's very simple. It's like a melody, a tune that in your mind has fixed a period, a time, a happening. And when you hear that, that whole thing comes back to you. Well, so it is when you think of Gladys Walton and you look at the photographs. And if you were to see a movie, that period of those days, those hours would come right back to you. And that is the reason that we have this great love for Pola Negri, for Gloria Swanson, because they have in some way incorporated part of our life in their life. So I explained that in here for the benefit of most of these people. A lot of theater people get this. I don't say the Lunts get it or Helen Hayes, but I mean the old-time people. Of course, they're not exactly kids.
No.
So anyway, that's the only things I wanted to show you.
Okay, well, fine, I'll look at
No,
them.
that's all.
Well, tell me, were you born here in Hastings?
I was born in East Chicago, Indiana, in 1910. You know, I was trying to figure that out the other day. If I was born in 1909, which was the date, the time, when my next birthday comes, in other words, am I considered a year old? Are you considered a year old from the time you're born because you spent 9 months in your mother's womb?
I don't think so.
I don't think
no,
so.
No, you're not. It's from the day you're born.
It's for the birthday that follows that.
Yes.
In other words, in 1910, I would be 1 year old.
Right. And up until then, they would probably say you were 3 months,
4 months. Oh. Because it never was straight in my mind, not that that 1 year matters, but it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it goes from your
I
actual
think
day
it
of
would be
birth.
cheated if they're going to count as months as being conceived.
Yes, I think so. Well, how come your parents came to Hastings?
It was one of those things. My father and mother came here from Hungary. They were not married to each other. And there were people, Hungarian colony here in Hastings, who would come from Budapest and from the outlying areas. And my father and mother met here in Hastings. They were married here in Hastings. And that was 1900. My mother was 16. And my father was 10 years older. And they were very poor.
How did he happen to come here from Chicago?
He had a sister living here.
Oh, and he felt he'd be more comfortable with other
There
Hungarians?
was a pavement factory here.
Yes, I know that.
And that, of course, you know more about that than I do, because you've been looking it up or working with it. But he got a job through his brother-in-law, his sister's husband, in the asphalt, the pavement thing. And then something happened. It shut down, or he was fired or something, and another relative was working in Chicago. So they said, there's jobs here. So in lieu of the fact that Ann and I, my younger sister, were still not conceived, there were 5, and they moved to Chicago. And then while they were there in 1909, 10, 11, 12, my sister Ann and I were born there.
Oh, I see. They came to Hastings first, then they went to Chicago, and then they came back to Hastings.
With 2 more children, yes.
And why did they come back?
Apparently, the factory shut down there, or he got fired. As a rule, my father was not fired because he was a very dependable and very hard worker and reliable. So 9 times out of 10, either the plant shut down or something happened, or he got a better job here or something like that. I don't know.
So you came to Hastings when you were about 4 years old?
I think, I'm not actually sure of all this myself. I think that from Chicago they went to Perth Amboy, New Jersey.
Oh.
I wouldn't try to follow any others, they'll go crazy. They went to Perth Amboy, New Jersey. We lived there about 2 or 3 years. And again, it was because my mother's sister was living there. And there was all sorts of factories there. It's a factory town. So from there, we moved here in 1914, and we've been here ever since. Now that I'm 100% positive,
Yeah.
because in 1914 I was 5.
And you lived down somewhere in south side?
We lived opposite that. Now how am I going to tell you this? There's that, what used to be a hotel, the 2-story red brick thing.
Yeah, I know
beyond
where
the
that
Irish flat. We lived across the street in what was at that time the
In
name.
the building that Lucian
Yes,
Lucian.
Lucian had. Well, it was opposite that, and burned down about 3 years ago. And when we lived in it, it was called Dobrotsky, which is a Polish name or Russian name, Dobrotsky's house. And it
How
was
do you
about,
spell that?
oh, honey. Dubrowsky, something like that. And it was all Hungarian Slovak families living in there at the time.
It was an apartment house.
Yeah, about 6 families. As a matter of fact, there were 3 on either side, yes. And we lived in the middle. And then from there we moved to number 6 Main Street, which is where Euper's store is now.
Which store?
Euper's was it had the hardware store on Main Street. The big one, I don't know what you call it.
Home workshop?
No, it's directly about 2 or 3 doors from Benson's on the corner.
Oh.
It's a very large brick building.
Yeah,
It had been a
yeah.
hardware shop up until a couple of years
Oh.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
And on the side of that was a wooden frame house for 2 families. We paid $9 a month rent. And Elsie Wagner's father owned it.
Really?
And we paid $9 a month rent, and we were probably happier there, Mary, than we have ever been any place at any time. All of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice place?
Well, it wasn't that so much. It's that we were all, for heaven's sake, I was 5, 6, 7. My sister Ann was a couple of years younger, but my mother was 30. My father was 35 or 40. And the world was a rose in bloom.
Mm.
We hadn't even blossomed yet.
Well, the church was still down there
The
then.
Grace Church was directly opposite
Uh-huh.
our house, and Kaufman's wooden frame house was opposite ours. Sam and Morris Kaufman, who later built the Farragut Inn. And at that time, there was a trolley came across the bridge. And I wrote this whole thing up, about 48 chapters, and it's in the, Mr. Bliss, Bert Bliss printed it every week, and it was always 5 or 6 pages. And even then, when I was doing that, the main reason I did it was I had such great love for all these things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Infinitesimal little happenings that to me were like 3,000, millions and millions of dollars worth of diamonds. They stood out in my mind that way. I was never casual ever about life, never at any time. And I'm very grateful that I haven't been, because Edna Ferber, in her book, A Peculiar Treasure, or Peculiar Pleasure, I've forgotten which it was. I think it was A Peculiar Treasure. Edna Ferber said she is very grateful that she always felt she was a part of life, that she was in the parade, that she was marching, that she was seeing, that she was doing, rather than be somebody on the corner watching the parade.
Mm. That's a good philosophy.
Yes, she said, I have always been part of everything, and she said, I'm so grateful that I knew at the time when I was doing various things that this is being alive, this is life, the very essence, the reason for everything, rather than to be standing someplace watching somebody else. And that impressed me tremendously, and then I Xeroxed that, and I mailed it to a lot of people, because I felt, and there are so many people, as a matter of fact, I think the tragedy, Mary, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that too many people stand and watch the doers.
What was the village like it when you were growing up as a kid?
Well, everybody knew everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That was the difference. I knew practically the name of every family in every house. One reason for it was that I sold the Hastings News on Friday and the Hastings Press on Saturday.
Well, there were 2 newspapers
Yes.
then.
And the Hastings Press was over here next
Yeah,
before
where
Henry
Dominic
Baker.
is.
Yeah, and a man named Mr. Henry printed it, and we got a penny for selling it. But in those days, we somehow or other got an allotment of 25 newspapers apiece, and it was 25 cents on Friday and 25 cents on Saturday. And sometimes somebody gave you a tip of a penny or 2 pennies. In other words, the paper was 3 cents, and they gave you a nickel, and they said, keep the change.
Oh, boy.
Collapse.
Did you sell them just on the street, or did you go
No,
around
I
to the
went to
houses?
all the houses, because I'd go to Pine Crest, and I knew all the families. I would go right to the end where the Lyceum was, the families there. But you see the way it was in those days, each boy had his section. There were maybe 10 to 12 of us boys, and one of us had Pine Crest at this end, another one had Riverview Manor, another one had Tower Ridge and Riverview Place. And so we sort of, unless the boy who had Tower Ridge was sick or went away or something, and then we would take over, and by that time he would generally ask us if we would.
Uh-huh.
So the thing about it was that everybody knew everyone. I won't say we all loved each other. As a matter of fact, there was a certain element of children that were shits, if you'll pardon me. I mean the kind that the world hasn't today. I was always a shrimp. So a lot of the bigger boys would pick on me and fight with me. And I was never a good fighter. I was not a good fighter physically. In the first place, I knew my limitations. The second place, frankly, I didn't like being hit by somebody who was 6 or 7 inches taller than I was. I was not a nut to stand there and try to beat him up. So I didn't, there was a certain element of that. But there wasn't the thing that goes on today of 2 or 3 boys getting together and stealing some boy's personal property, or knifing him, or beating him up, or robbing him.
Did you have sports teams?
We had only what was in school, and there was a certain attempt at Boy Scouts, but most of us, like the Hungarian, the Polish, the Italian, we had to work after school.
Mm-hmm. You did.
And we couldn't be Boy Scouts, and even if I didn't go out and work to earn money, I had to come home and pile wood, or go and pick cokes, because under the bridge, they used to dump the hot remaining ashes from the factory, and it was directly under the bridge.
Under Warburg Bridge?
Yeah, and so when it cooled, there were cokes,
Oh, yeah.
and practically all of the village boys, girls, 10, 11, 9, 10, we would go with our burlap bags or whatever and pick cokes. We had to. And then when we got it home, we had bins where we put the coke. And we also had to saw wood and chop wood and store the wood and put it neatly in place. And because we all had wood fires, we had no heat in that house on Main Street. And kerosene lamps. I had 7 lamps every afternoon that I had to fill and trim the wick and clean the chimneys. And I had to be very careful about the chimney, because my father, if there was a ridge of smoke or soot or something in that chimney when I put it on the table, he had a word or two for me. And if the wick was cut so that it burned wrong, he had another word for me. But it wasn't so much that I wanted to do it the right way. I got a certain achievement, a sense of, there, that's marvelous, that's wonderful. I did it.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you go to school up here?
Hastings Grammar School.
And that was where it is today? Or was it the preschool?
We went to the first building. No, we went to the first building. It was then called the elementary school building. And then there was only the old high school, but there wasn't all the tremendous extension that there is today.
Yes,
I have to use your John.
Okay, the middle door.
Is it?
No, to the
Oh, I'm sorry.
start working for money, I suppose you got a little older.
Well, selling newspapers was working for money. I used to go to the golf course and caddy at Ardsley, and we'd get 40 cents. But I was so shrimpy that the bag sometimes was almost as tall or as big as I was. And so I get 40 cents, but I'll tell you something, I was worn out at the end of the 18 holes carrying that bag. And sometimes the man I was caddying for would have to carry the bag, and he felt sorry for me. still, I wasn't too good at that, but I was always very proud when I come home with 40 cents and give it to my mother. Because 40 cents in those days, bought a heck of a lot of a loaf of bread and a quart of milk and a lot of other things.
Where was your father working then?
He always worked down here in the pavement.
No.
See, my father had a genius, really, for machinery, for mechanics, and they called him the master mechanic down there because whenever anything went wrong with any machinery, no matter what, my father had this inborn instinct for being able to look at it and figure this, and suddenly he'd know just what to do with it. And invariably, he was able to take an old piece of pipe or a piece of wire or a couple of screws from here or there, and in some way manipulate it that it would work again, and it would work. And everything that he did around the house, 35, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it's one of the things that makes me so ashamed of myself because as a kid, there was a long spell when I disliked my father intensely. And it was mainly because he drank and because he would beat my mother. But my God, every child that I knew, the father drank and beat the mother. And that at least was the father drinking. It wasn't the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid taking dope and drinking.
Yeah.
But I went through a thing of having a bitter dislike. Oh, terrible. I used to pray that the Lord would protect my mother from my father. It was a terrible thing because, first of all, my father didn't really deserve it. When I look at it now, he didn't drink that much. And he did misbehave now and then, but God in heaven, when my sister and my brother and I got into our drinking, we were 50 times worse than my father. And it's one of the things about life that to me is so shattering, is that there isn't time to pick up the pieces and straighten them out. It's only in the last 10 years that I have cleansed my mind, clarified my mind, and tried to give to my father the due that was his. Because I think being a father most of the time, I would grant you that maybe 60% of the fathers, most fathers, are a bunch of shit, and excuse me again. But my father had the gift of hard work, and he never minded hard work. And he did do hard work, and he took great pride in what he did. And now I look back at it and I see that the drinking that he did was in confusion, because we all sided with my mother, and he was alone. He was in the corner by himself.
Did you speak Hungarian at home?
Oh yes. As a matter of fact, it was an ironclad law. My father would not allow us to sit at the table or eat anything at the dinner table. There were 7 children, my father and mother. They were always guests, relatives, or friends aboard us. And he could not speak. He didn't care if we spoke Polish, Slavish, Hungarian, or Chinese, but no English, because, and he was right, he said, you speak it all day long outside, and that you have to do. But if you don't speak Hungarian in this house, you're not going to know the language. And I've been ever so grateful to him ever since.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I speak it fluently, and I love the language.
Did your parents speak English?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes. My mother was a midwife. She had to, and she made herself understood. She spoke English, and she began to learn to speak German. She began to learn to speak Italian. She began to learn to speak Jewish from all of her women that she delivered babies to. She delivered over 1,000.
My goodness.
And my father, yes, he was able to make himself understood. And, as a matter of fact, he had no difficulty it was broken English. But my gosh, you hear kids today who have to go to school, born right here, and they talk like this, you know.
Yeah. So you went all through, did you graduate from the Hastings High School?
I did not go to high school.
You didn't go to
No. I went to 1 year of high school. Because when I was about 12 or 13, I was so restless about what I thought was my life, my career. Time was running out, and I was such a pest about it that my father and mother in some way allowed me to go to a dramatic school. I was actually 14.
And that's when you went down to New York.
Yeah, to 72nd Street, to the Albini Dramatic School. And the way that happened was a cousin of mine.
Albini?
Alviene.
A-L-V.
Alviene. And it was at 43 West 72, between Amsterdam and Central Park West. And a cousin of mine.
77, you said?
72.
72.
Cousin of mine who was about 4 years older and a handsome fellow. When I was 14, he was 18. He had the catalog because he had seen it in a magazine or a newspaper and sent away for it. And he wanted to be an actor. And he never did anything about it. Nothing ever happened. But he gave me the catalog. I then wrote, we made an appointment. And I went down and that started it. And I took acting lessons for what they're worth.
Was it usual for an aspiring actor to start so young?
At 14? Yes, because on Saturdays, the Saturdays and holidays, and sometimes even during the week, they had, I'd say, about 50% of them were children from about 5 to 8 to 16 who were taking dancing lessons or piano lessons or dance, whatever, eurythmics, whatever, Dow Crows, whatever they called it, forms of ballet. And yes, because I remember we did children's plays on Saturday afternoon, and we were all children. Every one of us were up to about 14, 15. So that they had a special segment for that.
Did you study singing or ballet or dance?
I didn't study singing then, but in 1932 or 3, when I came back from Hollywood, a friend of mine in New York, a woman who had been a coach, a voice coach, insisted on giving me lessons for nothing, singing lessons. So for about a year and a half or so, I went to her home down in the village, Greenwich Village, and I had singing lessons. She coached me in singing, and it helped me a great deal to the extent that I learned breathing correctly and phrasing and how to get the meaning out of, and how to let what the composer wants to say, to let that come through.
Did you ever sing professionally?
Yes, seriously, believe it or not. There was the Actors Dinner Club. It was during 33, 4, 5, the Depression years, and they had people of the profession. I was by that time a member of Actors Equity. You could get up, and you couldn't get up, you had to make an arrangement. And Saturday night or Monday night next week, you sang, or you played the piano, or you played the harp, or you recited, or whatever.
Well, sort of a showcase?
Yes, and they had dinner there for the people of the Depression years. You got a coupon or a ticket or something, you didn't have to pay. And various stars, Beverly Bain, Mabel Italia Farrow, Irene Rich, various stars of that period, were well-known women, were hostesses, and it was sort of a family thing, and it didn't cost you anything. It was pleasant, and also it was a showcase for them. So I sang, I don't think I was very good. In fact, I think I was awful. But I did. I got up and sang. But I also then sang one song that I did very well. There was a benefit in oh my goodness, I was waiting for your friend. Oh, will she come here to you?
I think, how long did you study at the Albini
Oh my
School?
God, for about 3 years.
3 years. You feel it was good training?
Yes, because it broke the thing between amateur and professional. Not that you become a professional when you leave, but it initiates you to what the professional theater, acting, people are all about. And I feel that it depends, and I used to give this advice to actors beginners when I was an agent. Per se, the dramatic school means nothing when you go to an agent or a producer. The fact that you say, I went to Albini Dramatic School, that means nothing. But what does mean something is the producer, the agent, the director, then knows that you have crossed the line of amateur, and you have some glimmering of what is going on in the professional theater. So it's important, plus which you do learn things like breathing, makeup, fencing, dancing. Now, I took dancing. I never became a dancer, but it helped me to the extent it gave me an awareness of rhythm, of time steps, of grace. For instance, I hated ballet. I hated it. I thought it was such a sissy thing. But I had to do it. They forced me to do it as part of the thing. And yet, even there, you learn not that this means anything, but you know what I'm trying to say. And fencing, too, the same way. I never could fence. I couldn't do a damn thing. But the basics of it, the grace of it, the quickness of it, the thinking of it, all this comes in very handy when you, well, in any walk of life it would come in handy.
Sure. So you were about 17 when you left there?
No, I was less than that. I was 15 and a half. And the thing is, the reason I mention that is that 15 and a half, when I was 15 and a half, was not the whore that they are today at 15 and a half. I don't say they all are. But,
well, that would mean you were there about a year and a half then.
well, I was probably there about 2 years or so, because after my course was up that my father and mother paid for, they asked me to stay on to be in this play and that play and the other play, and I didn't have to pay. So I was there about 2.5 years, but the actual thing that we paid for was about a year and a half.
Well, were you able to find a job then when you left?
Curiously, yes. John DeSpos's had a play. You see, you start making rounds. Rounds means between 42nd Street and 52nd Street on 7th Avenue, mostly. And that, at that time, between 7th and 8th. There were theatrical producers, agents, etc. And so you went to the producers' offices. There wasn't much sense in your going to agents because you had no experience. The agents couldn't say, oh, he did this, he did that, he did this. And when you're 15, they can't. But so by chance, and I've always argued and I maintain that in life as well, but in the theater, chance, opportunity, the thing of being at the right place at the right time is 95% of it. So by chance, I was in an agent's office. They were doing a play down in the Cherry Lane Theater of John DeSpos's, and it was his play, Manhattan Transfer, and it was dramatized. And they were doing it. Helen Chandler, Alan Jocelyn, who were then well-known names, were doing the lead that was down at the Cherry Lane Theater. And they sent me for the part of the newsboy. Well, at the age of 15 and a half, I was perfect for a newsboy. And he was one scene. So I got the job. It was $25 a week. But again, $25 at that time was $75 or $100 today. But that wasn't the important point, as you well know.
To get the experience.
Yeah, so that was the first thing I did. And that play lasted about 3 or 4 weeks. And Alexander Walker, George G. Nathan reviewed it. People of that caliber. And in March following that, this was in the fall, in March, I got a job in a play called Window Panes, which was a Broadway play. And there again, I played a Russian peasant. And it was a story of something like the passing of the third floor back, the thing of Christ coming back to earth, etc. And I was a Russian peasant, and I was just one of the mob, and the thing was $2 a performance. About 10 of us were Russian peasants who come to the house where the Christ figure is supposed to appear. And at a given point later in the script, the director said, and we were rehearsing at the Mansfield Theater, which is on 47th Street. He said, now I want, in this scene, I've got to have some life, vitality, and I want to have a balalaika, etc. But I want to have a boy and a girl get up and do a Russian dance. Who can do a Russian dance? Well, nobody. I said, oh, shit, excuse me again. I said, he doesn't know Hungarian Çağdaş. I do the Hungarian Çağdaş. I do it very well. That's the national dance. So I got up. I said, I do it. So I did. I got up and I did some of the steps of the Çağdaş. Well, it's passed just as well. It's practically the same thing. It's just that you don't get down on the floor and do this thing that they always associate with the Cossacks. Yeah. So he said, that's fine, that's fine. So a girl chimed in to dance with. So for that, they raised my salary to $25 more on top of the $2, plus which they gave me a couple of lines of dialogue, plus which they put my name in the program, and my real name being Stephen, they called me in the program Stefan, S-E-P-H-A-N. So that was how I got on Broadway, and that a small part. And Then within a couple of months, this is all beginner's luck, you see. And I've always argued that there's a great but honesty and truth about beginner's luck. When you're new, it's like a shiny penny. People reach for it. So in March or so, not March, that was March, this was about May, the the telephone operator. And I always made it a point, and I liked it, because I was accustomed to people who worked for a living. So I became very friendly with all the help, because I also believed that they are the ones that opened the door. And so this telephone operator said they're doing a play, Paul Muni, except at that time his name was Muni Wise and Friend, and he's going to be the star. George Abbott is going to direct it. There's a newsboy in it. He played a newsboy. So, all right. So they sent me for the part, and it was Broadway. Paul Muni was starring, and George Abbott, John Golden was a big Broadway producer. And I, again, had one scene, but it was a very focal scene. It was a Prohibition era. And there was a Chicago gang war, and I was on Paul Muni's side. So I had one little bit with him where he said, now, this is what you're going to do, this, and you come in so and so and so. And then I had 2, 3 lines, and that was the key. And then later, when the gang war is going on, and the thing is really cooking, I run in to sell newspapers, and the enemy gang, think I'm just a snotty newsboy, and instead I run over to my side, Paul Muni, and in my news bag are a lot of handguns, and I distribute them. So it was important in that sense, but that was all I did. But the play ran a year.
Oh, that was good. So that was a good experience.
Yes, and also
What was the name of that play?
4 Walls, F-O-U-R, 4 Walls. And I was in the play for the entire year. And now, why don't you ask more questions?
Well, how did you get from Broadway to Hollywood?
The next play was a play called The Medicine Man. And here again is chance. I walked into an office, the Playhouse Theater building, 48th Street. Alice Brady, the star, her father, William A. Brady, owned that building. And it was all theatrical managers. And I walked in. Now, there was a time, if I saw 3 people in an office, I wouldn't go in. I was just that scared. I would always wait till it was empty. But by this time, I'd had this little bit of experience, and I'd gotten a little more confidence. And I walked in, and at the outer office, sitting a man about 40, very distinguished-looking man, and something, and he asked me my name, etc., etc. I didn't know who he was. I thought, well, he's a friend of the girl, probably, the one that's usually sitting here, and she went to the toilet, and he sits while she's there, and that was about what I thought. And finally, he said, well, asked my name, I told him the plays, and he said, well, there's a part in my new play, and so and so and so, and I thought, listen to him saying my new play, just putting on. So finally, when he said, and I want you to come and see me again next Monday or two, so I said, well, what is your name? He said, it's John Cromwell. Well, John Cromwell was one of the biggest Broadway directors of his day, and later became one of the biggest of the Hollywood directors, one of the most successful. He directed Leslie Howard in Of Human Bondage, many others.
So you did go to see him?
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, so many actors, so many people, they insist that they did it. And again, if you'll pardon me, I won't say the same word, but God damn it, it's not true. I think there is a destiny, a fate, that says at 10 after 12, when you're on this corner, instead of going to that corner, at 1:15, you have got to be here because fate, destiny, has waiting here for you something, so you're not going to go there, and you, when you're standing here, you have no idea that you're going to go there, because that's where you wanted to go. But something says to you, well, just go. So you say to yourself, well, I'll what's in that store window? I'll go and see what's in that store. Oh, my gosh. Oh, now what's in this one? Pretty soon you say, oh, well, I'm right down here, and that's that office. Well, I'll go up. You go up there, and John Cromwell is waiting.
Oh, it's fantastic. So you got the part.
Yes. And that's why when so many people have said to me that it was their talent, it was my magnetism, bullshit, baloney.
What was the name of that play?
That play was called The Medicine Man. And
that was The Medicine Man.
That was the play in which Minor Watson was signed to star. And the feminine lead was the wife, but not at that time, Mayo Metho, who later married Bogart. But she had been a star in her own right on Broadway. She played opposite George M. Cohan, Grant Mitchell, several other big stars. And she was a very fine actress. It's a pity she married him because her drinking problem was accelerated by being married to him. And she was a good actress. She and Miner were the two leads. And I used to see Miner at the station. I knew he was Miner Watson, but I didn't speak to him. I knew he was going to be in this play, but I didn't say to him, only because I was afraid to. He was a star. And the part I had was a pivotal role. It was the story of a Pennsylvania Dutch, a Mennonite family, wherein my father, Moffat Johnson, who was a very well-known Broadway actor, was a Pennsylvania Dutch farmer, and he wants to marry his brother's daughter, his first cousin. My mother, I'm his son, I'm 14, my mother has died. And the point of the play is Miner Watson is a traveling medicine man, comes in throughout a truck. They stop overnight. He's delivering the usual speech, and Mayo is listening to it, and he's watching her, and he has an eye for her because she's pretty. And then they get to talking. Then he learns her problem, that the father's forcing her to marry the uncle. And as a result will come, what the hell do you call it, the thing of...
Confrontation?
No, there's another word for it, of the fact that the family blood mixing.
Oh.
And it's wrong.
Inbreeding.
Yeah, the thing that it's wrong to intermarry families, first cousins, that's that thing. It still holds today. And, hello. So, the part I had was a boy who was, believe it or not, mentally retarded. Now, he wasn't a gibbering idiot. He just walked around sort of in a trance with his mouth open and sort of a boy who was not all there. And they didn't have him playing at any gestures or gyrations or anything of that sort. He just was not all up there. And the main reason he was in the play was to be the living example, a living proof to this girl and to the audience that if you marry, this is what will happen. So he was an important role, and also I had a scene there where my father has killed a man who's come to town who was trying to do him out of some land property, money that was due him, and I had seen my father do it. And my father says to me that if I tell anybody, he will beat me to death, something like that. So Miner Watson and I, the very best scene I had was when Miner realizes that I know something about this murder that is going on, and Miner tries to get the truth out of me. And I am remembering that my father says he'll beat me up, plus the fact that being mentally retarded, it's difficult for him to speak. The words don't come easily. And it was a very, very difficult scene. We always had trouble in rehearsal with it, and then it finally came through. And I got very good write-ups for it, and it was a very difficult role. And believe me, I had not enough experience by that. I just had those few weeks of this or that. So anyway, the play flopped, unfortunately. It didn't run, and they bought it for Hollywood about a year later, and then they asked me to go on
to do it again.
Do it, yeah, the film.
So you...
Miner didn't do the film.
When would you have gone, when would that have been?
Oh, God, I hate to go that far back, but I'll tell you when. It was 1929, October.
October 1929?
Yeah, and Jack Benny played Miner's part. Miner Watson.
Because that was right before the crash then.
Yes, as a matter of fact, the crash happened when I got out there.
Did that make any
Not to
difference?
this film, no, they went ahead with the film.
And then you stayed there?
Yes, yeah.
As an actor?
As an actor.
So you found work in film?
Yes, because John Cromwell, the man I just told you about, was at Paramount, directing. And I knew he was, and I had just finished this, so I went to see him. He remembered me, and this Medicine Man was the play he wanted to do, and he didn't do it. Ultimately, for some reason or other, and Sam Harris, who was a big Broadway producer, he did it, but John Cromwell said, you go and you see Mr. Harris and tell him that I wanted you for it, but I'm not going to do the play. So that was how it came about. So he was interested when I got to California, and I went to see him, and he knew I'd done the movie, and I'd done the play, etc., and he, of course, felt responsible, which he was. So he put me in a picture with Gary Cooper and Fay Ray. It was a picture called The Texan. and I was Mexican half-breed houseboy. I worked for Emma Dunn, who was the lady of the manor, and she was the mother of Gary Cooper, and Gary Cooper was her long-lost son. Anyway, that's beside the point.
Now,
And
by this time it was talking person.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was never into silent pictures.
Mm-hmm. Well, so did you were
Well, it was
able
just
to get
a small
series
part.
of roles?
It was just a small part. I was in the background all the time, and I had a couple of lines here and there. And then I was put into a picture a month or two later. Another New York director that I knew was directing, Miriam Hopkins, Kay Francis, Clive Brooke, and Miner was in this picture. And again, I didn't know Miner was in the picture until we met on the lot at Paramount. And Miner had one of about the fourth or fifth part. It ran through the whole picture. And I was, in those days they called it a babyface gangster. There was I don't think I had any baby face, but anyway, I was sort of a babyface gangster henchman to Regis Toomey, who was the main villain of the piece. This was Louis Brownfield's story, 24 Hours. It was a big success as a novel. And I was in several scenes, but nothing of any consequence.
Did you ever get any really good roles, big roles,
not
major roles?
Not until 1972, when I did the picture here, The Shriek of the Mutilated. I did in New York, and I had the central role in that, but that was what
1972?
Yeah, that was called a quickie. What they call a quickie, a shoestring picture. It was made in New York. It was independent.
Well, how did you become when you changed from an actor to an agent?
I'll tell you in a minute, but I have to go to John. Here's an interesting letter from Millicent Stanley. You know who she is?
Yes.
The way that happened
An
was,
agent.
by 1932, I came back to New York because I had done only bits in pictures. They weren't of any consequence. The only thing I did out there of any value was I played Oswald in Ghost, Gibson's play, and that was at an off-Broadway theater. And the only reason that stood out was that Mrs. Patrick Campbell, the famous English actress, came one night, and Theda Bara, the silent movie star, brought her, and there wasn't much professional theater in Los Angeles, or rather Hollywood, because we were in Hollywood proper. And Mrs. Pat came that night, and later she became involved in my life. And see, that's what I mean, is that night I hated her. Well, I didn't really hate her, but I thought, to hell with her. Because she looked at my performance, she said, "Young man," she said, "Oswald Alving was syphilitic, not epileptic." That's what she thought of my performance. So Jimmy Cagney, who was a friend of mine, had come to see it, and he was waiting at the door for me, and we were going to go out afterwards to have a sandwich someplace at a drive-in place. So he said, "Well, what did she say?" And I said, "Well, she said that Oswald Alving was syphilitic, not epileptic." And he said, "Syphilitic, epileptic." He said, "Well, Steve, for God's sake, you know, that's a damned insult." So I said, "Ah, to hell with it, let's go have some coffee." But then, curiously, that thread in the pattern bobbed up in 1935 with Mrs. Campbell thing, and later in 1937. And I choose to become a very strong influence in my life.
How come?
Well, first, the way I got to be an agent, Theodore Hammerstein, who was of the Hammerstein family in New York, he was the nephew of Arthur Hammerstein and the first cousin of Oscar Hammerstein II, lived in Dobbs Ferry. He was a producer of plays. Now, he would go back and forth on the train, and I had gone to his office as an actor to try to get a job. He was always very courteous to me, and we would sit on the train and just gab the way one would. Now, after we'd been riding back and forth, and let's say by about 1934 or 5, he said, "Steve," or he didn't say Steve because he'd call me Alan. Alan, he said, "For God's sake," he said, "why the hell don't you do something else?" He said, "The acting thing isn't happening the way it's so. He said, in my office, not in my office, my building, Palace Theater building, right next door to me, he said, M.S. Benson was an agent. I knew who he was. He was a very reputable agent, well known. He said, he's looking for somebody to take care of the theatrical, the dramatic, the straight dramatic casting. So, well, it doesn't pay. You get 50% of your telephone calls. So I thought, well, if I do that, I'll get to talk to the directors and the producers, and then I'll be able to get a job as an actor. Well, it doesn't happen that way. It doesn't work that because the farther you become involved, the deeper you become involved, the less you think about yourself. And secondly, if you suddenly say to the producer, now wait a minute, I'd be very good for that part, he'd say, listen, make up your mind, buddy, what are you, an actor or an agent? Which? So I stayed with it. So by 1936 and 7, I had also been writing, again, free, for a newspaper in New York called Amerique. And what I did was write about celebrities whom I knew. And I also used it in another way. If I wanted to get to know Dwight Wyman, who was a Broadway producer, or William A. Brady, I could call up or write and say, I would like to do a story about you for my paper. Now, this was in French, which gave it something singular. I didn't write it in French. The man who owned the newspaper, Mr. Lacoste, wrote it in French. But I would write it in English. However, I utilized it that the people whom I liked, that were friends of mine, Jimmy Cagney, C.T. Johann, several others, Julie Hayden, I would write about them first, that Mrs. Patrick Campbell, Rudy Valley. Then, if I wanted to meet somebody else, a star, Jane Cowell or somebody, I would make an appointment and do an interview for her because it was for this French newspaper. But I went beyond that. I went to Sardi's, and I went to the English tea room, and I went to Rumpelmeyer's, and I said, if I mention you in my column, because I had first the column where I did the vignette, the story about the person. Then I had deliberately contrived to think of what's happening around town. So then I was able to go to Sardi's and have lunch, and Lindsay's, and I could places I couldn't afford. Lots of times I didn't even have the tip. I had to get the tip from my mother to be able to, because those days commutation was only $8 a month. So that part of it, once the commutation was taken care of, I could go in and out as much as I pleased, but I didn't always have the 25 cents tip.
Well, who paid for your lunch?
Sardi's.
So Sardi's was.
I then would mention them
I see.
in my column. I would always have to think of something by way of mentioning them. So, Mrs. Pat Campbell came to New York to star in a play for William A. Brady called A Party, which was written by Ivan Novello, the English actor star. And it was about Mrs. Patrick Campbell and was played in London by Lillian Braithwaite. But Mrs. Pat did it in New York. Now, one of the most difficult things in the world, as you probably know, is for an actor to play himself on stage. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to play yourself. It's very difficult if somebody says, come out, Alan Brock or Mrs. Patrick Campbell. That's very difficult because you have nothing to protect you. But when you are in a play, and it's 3 acts, and the whole thing is built around Mrs. Patrick Campbell, and now in London they loved it. Yes, because London knew her as one of the family. But here in this country they didn't feel that way about Mrs. Pat, so the play flopped. And I had heard that she was flat